Welcome to Clap Back Get the Facts podcast, where we are providing you with the information you need to know about what's politically impacting Black women across the country. In a world filled with mis and disinformation, we provide you with the real. If you're a Black woman, representing Black women, or in the community with Black women, we are here to clap back and give you the facts. Thank you for joining Season 1, Episode 2. Will Biden be on the ballot in Ohio? Demand Ohio Republicans stand for democracy. We will be sharing the facts and dropping gems. So let's get ready to clap back, get the facts.
Thank you for joining Season 1, Episode 2. Will Biden be on the ballot in Ohio? The demand for Ohio Republicans to stand for democracy. We will be sharing facts and dropping gems. So let's get into it. Clap back, get the facts. This week, in fact, Ohio Republicans rejected a proposal from Democrats to ensure that Biden's name will appear on the ballot. For many of us, this just sounded crazy. And if I'm being honest, the Secretary of State actually notified the Biden campaign about this several weeks ago. And there was not much fanfare around it because honestly, most people figured they'd work it out. That's what I figured. And so how in the world did we get here? How is it that a presumed nominee can even be left off the ballot? We're going to go to one of our legal experts in-house, Chantel Mullen. How you doing? Well, actually, before we get right into it, let me introduce some of my compadres that are joining me on our podcast adventures. Chantel Mullen, who will, of course, also be bringing our legal position. Chantel, how you doing today?
Girl, I'm hanging in, but I'm doing great. Awesome. Glad to be here.
Listen, and just glad to be around, correct? Because it's a little tough on a sister. Whew. And of course, bringing the energy and the heat is our very own Simone Henderson. We wanted to make sure that when we have these conversations, we are representing diverse points of view. So Chantel and I are handling the geography. She's from the South. I'm from the Midwest, but I brought in my Midwestern sister who's also representing a whole nother generation. And that is Simone Henderson. Welcome, Simone.
Hey, y'all. Hey.
So I don't know about y'all, but I just want to make sure that we are letting the folks know about what's the real and what's the fake news, as we say, on this Ohio thing. And Simone, I know you're from Ohio, so you'll have a lot to say about what's happening in Ohio. But before we get to that, let me make sure that we start out as we always try to do with, what are the facts? What are the laws? So where do we stand, Chantel? What are we dealing with in Ohio?
Okay. So, elections are handled by the states. And so all states have their different rules about how candidates can get on the ballot. What are those different requirements? So Ohio has this 90-day requirement in their state law. So it means that you got to certify them 90 days before Election Day, which means that this year it has to be by August the 7th. Well, that happens to be before the Democratic National Convention, where the candidates or the presumptive nominee, who is President Biden, will be nominated by the Democratic Party. And so this has kind of left the Democratic Party and President Biden in a conundrum. And so, this isn't a new issue. It's just that it's a new response to the issue, because the same thing happened back in 2012 when Mitt Romney and Barack Obama were on the ballot. And so Ohio passed a temporary deadline change. They did the same thing in 2020 for Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So they've done it for both Democrats and Republicans when there has been an issue. The difference this year is we got Ohio with a Republican supermajority and a whole bunch of people who just want to be petty. So we got the Republican petty patties who are just refusing to do what they have done earlier.
Right.
Now I will say this, because one, Democrats should have been a little bit more on notice, because we know who the head of the Republican Party is, and Petty is his middle name. And this is the same person who had who sat back and watched the Republicans negotiate a whole immigration bill, and come out with a bipartisan immigration bill, where actually Democrats went a lot more to the right than they normally would. And then he called them up and said, dump your bill. Don't even vote for the stuff you have worked on, because we don't want to give Biden a win. So what we have here is the leadership infiltrating down to the state level. Where normally they wouldn't even be involved in this, but the pettiness it's from the head all the way down. The fish rots from the head. And so it is all the way down. And instead of them being adults and doing what they normally do, what they've done in 2012 and in 2020, they know this is an issue. They actually put it in their budget in 2019 because it was going to be an issue. They knew when the Democratic convention was. They actually didn't say anything to the Democrats until April of 2024, when the convention dates were known in 2023. It's an issue. And so the Democrats have a couple of things that they could do. They could, fight it out and litigate it. They could also just kind of do a virtual mini convention before that date just to resolve this. The Republicans, they also have to remember that Biden got 2.6 million voters in 2020. And so those folks will be voting at the state level. And so they gotta, it becomes a tit for tat. And we knew this was coming, because if you happen to listen to the oral arguments for the case where the Colorado Supreme Court tried to remove Trump from the ballot, in there was some alluding to that, if Trump was removed from the ballot, that the Republicans would find ways to get back at the Democrats, which I also find very interesting, considering that the case in Colorado was brought by Republicans. So I really am still trying to understand how Republicans bring a case, and Republicans bring a case and it becomes the Democrats' problem, and they get punished for Republican on Republican drama.
Well, you have given us a whole lot, and we got to break that all down into smaller bites. One part I want to start with is just in terms of where the Republicans sit in this, because this is, first of all, thank you for noting that this is not a new situation. This has been a state law. We have seen precedents by Republicans on what they want to do when it has impacted both Republicans and Democrats twice before. The legislature had no problem passing the law whatsoever. I would also like to say that this is another space where you see it's a uniquely kind of Republican situation, because also we have this in other states. This is not a law unique to Ohio. We have seen this, for instance, in Washington state as well. It has the same or similar law, and they've already accepted the provisional certification from the Democratic Party to ensure that he is on the ballot. And so again, we're seeing this not just in Ohio. Other states are willing to work it out. Now, I will note here before I go to Simone, this is kind of why we understand why people don't like the party structure. because of this petty stuff that you're talking about. And in Ohio in particular, while many consider it to be a so-called purple state, there is no doubt that Republicans are running this state on the state level. We have not only a Republican supermajority in both the House and the Senate. Literally, there are only 7 out of 32 senators, only 7 are Democrats. So they don't really have to ask them for anything, as well as the AG who has issued his statement and around what he interprets the law to be is a Republican. The Secretary of State is a Republican. The governor is a Republican. And the Chief Justice of the Ohio State Supreme Court is not only a Republican, but is the brother of the damn governor. Now, Simone, I mean, come on. What we gonna do here? What we gonna do? Is this typical? Is this what we can expect from Ohio for the rest of the term? What should we be doing?
Well, Ohio, sometimes, y'all know how I am about my state. Sometimes we don't get it right. This is that time. What we can be doing is pretty much both you and Chantel hit on it. Of tackling that this isn't one just unique to Ohio. Mm-hmm. As you noted, Washington State has already agreed to move forward with their exemption. Alabama has a similar response as Ohio. Their Secretary of State has reached out. What Ohio has as a solution is that by May 9th, they can accept to pass the provision. They've reached out to both the campaign, the committee, for both states have. And so we know that that's what's an opportunity that's there. Mm-hmm. What the legal counsel for the Secretary of State in Ohio has said is that really Ohio Democrats have 2 options: to legislate or to sue. To rely on the legislature, which, as you just broke down the demographic of that, not likely, or sue, which who knows how long that would be, or if they would move it as quickly as they did in cases like Colorado.
My question is, why does this have to be about politics or party at all? How come we can't just have a moment for democracy? How come we just can't put the choices on the ballot and say, hey, let the people decide? I mean, they let the people decide all kinds of things that sometimes I don't think the people necessarily need to be in. How come we cannot pick our own leaders?
I think that's a great question. And I think it goes to some of the hypocrisy, because I think oftentimes you hear Republicans when they want something to go their way, then it's let's put it on the ballot. Let's have the voters choose. Let's have them pick. But when it's free and we want to be democratic across the board, then all of a sudden that doesn't sound we're trying to catch a break or we're trying to be asked to be offered something. And that's just simply not the case. In 2020, you had Oklahoma, Illinois, Washington State again, and Montana all resolve this issue where the nominating process required an exception to have to be put in place. So absolutely, I think when we see it now, it is a testament to just how much they would like to streamline this to their side rather than it be fair.
I mean, is this a case of folks running scared of the Democrats? Are we now starting to see signs that Ohio is afraid that they cannot deliver the state for Donald Trump? I mean, what do you think this is indicative of?
Oh, I think absolutely. You how many times do we have to go back and forth for gerrymandered Ohio and the maps that they wanted to draw, and them not wanting fair districts for people to show up and have their voices heard for where they represent and where they live at. So I think this is a continuation of unfair state lines and districts, of trying to ensure that they maintain their Republican supermajority. And I think it's absolutely insane that you have the relatives who gets to, one, the governor, and then you have the chief Supreme Court justice, that they get to make decisions essentially in alignment with each other, and really distorts this idea of three branches of government, separate but equal, but all of them are family. So I don't know how that's where we the
and how
question.
and how I just like to kind of add in and piggyback off of what Simone has brought up.
Yes, ma'am.
And what you said, because it is about Republicans running scared. They don't like to say it that way, but if you actually look at what they are doing across the country, between the gerrymandering, the extreme partisan gerrymandering, the rolling back of voter rights, they have not won a popular vote at the presidential election level, and the trend is continuing that way. They are not appealing, and so they have to show, they have to find, if you look at this as a math problem, you're either adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And so Democrats are adding and multiplying. Republicans' policies are subtraction and division. It's just that. That's it.
So, man, that's crazy. That's a great, I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, if you think about it, right across the board, they're just looking for ways to take stuff away. While Democrats are looking for ways to give us stuff, to solve problems, to make sure we have rights and freedoms, Republicans are looking for ways to limit that. And what's crazy about that to me is, and Simone, I know you'll appreciate this with your degree in what's your degree in rhetoric?
That's just
is that much of the foundation of the Republican rhetoric, right, is around freedoms and not interfering in people's lives and choices, right, and less government interference. And in fact, they are using government as a way to limit people's rights and freedoms, and this is certainly no exception. How does this, it confuses me how this even really plays. Is this because who Republicans are at their core is changing, or is this just the influence of Trump?
I would say it's more so from Ohio and growing up there and in the southwest part of the state. I would say this is wholeheartedly more so the influence of Trump than who I think the typical Republican voter is. I think exactly like why we convene to have these conversations, that things like this aren't front of mind, aren't aware. I mean, you have the Secretary of State sifting through their bill, like their state legislature, to send to the campaign to find ways for them not to be on there. So this isn't regular public knowledge. So I don't think that these are things that,
right,
voters that choose to vote for Republican candidates are aware is going on.
Yeah. So given that, my question is and thought goes to, is this just a big old distraction? I mean, should we even be spending any time on this at all? Should we just say, hey, this is another way for Republicans to distract Democrats from their agenda? What do you think the Democrats' response to all of this should be? What do y'all think?
I think absolutely it's a distraction, but I think it has to be addressed because we are seeing, as you mentioned earlier, this isn't new. The way they're choosing to go about it is absolutely new. And if this trend were to continue, as you see, Alabama has the same response as Ohio. So it's going to have to be addressed. Or you have something moving forward, which, both parties would have to agree that they have their nominating conventions before a certain date, which could be up to, but there's a lot of hands in those pots to make those decisions that I don't think will be solved right here. But I think that it has to be addressed just because they're choosing.
And I agree. It does. It's both and.
Okay.
It's a distraction, but it's also an opportunity. Because I don't think people pay enough attention to the intersection of state and federal politics. We tend to think about them very linear, but we need to also start thinking about the intersectionality of those two, because we think about the presidential election, but as we have seen since January 6th on and all the way down, the role that the state plays in federal elections, which means that we need to think about more critically who we're putting in those state offices and what they believe foundationally. Because if you elect a whole bunch of people that don't believe in democracy, it's like, marrying somebody who doesn't really believe in marriage. They always gonna find ways to circumvent those vows, because those vows don't really mean anything to them.
You are both our legal expert and our expert on the metaphor between politics and relationships. You come with one every show, and I love it. It makes me wonder, though, in light of the fact that even Senator Matt Huffman recently said, well, even if we don't do anything, the Supreme Court is probably going to make us put him on the ballot anyway. What are the options? Which one, I don't know if that's true, given who we have on the Supreme Court, even though they have set their own precedents with the Colorado case. It was based on something completely different. It wasn't based on state law. It was based on the eligibility of the candidate. So again, I'm baffled by why people equate one thing that's unrelated to another thing that's unrelated. But what happens, let's say, in this crazy upsy-turvy world that Biden is just not on the ballot in Ohio, or at least not on the ballot as a Democrat? What are we thinking?
Well, people can always write him in.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's a heck of a lot more work. He could always be on there as an independent, because I remind people often that parties have one set of rules, but there are other sets of rules around getting on the ballot. And so there are rules for independents, which wouldn't have a convention because you're independent of a party. There are rules around getting on the ballot as a write-in. And so I don't think he's not going to be on the ballot. The question is, will he be on the ballot? Will he actually be written on the ballot, or will it require people to write him in? Will he be on the ballot as an independent, or will he be on the ballot as a Democrat? I fully think that the Republicans are going to make people jump through as many hoops as possible.
Yeah. Now, here's a query that I don't know the answer to, and we may not have the answer to, and we may have to get back with folks at a later time on this one. But given that he goes on the ballot, and this is only, let me preface this thought by saying, you are welcome to our intellectual thought experiment. This is not a real scenario, but an intellectual thought conversation. Just this portion right here. Let's say he's on the ballot as an independent. Under the rules of the Electoral College, are the Electoral College votes tallied by party or person? Because we do not have ranked choice voting. Here goes a plug for ranked choice voting. In our or multi-party lines at the federal level. So if you for instance, if you live in New York, I can vote. Your candidacy can be listed in several different party options, and all the votes tally to the person. Mm-hmm. Whether I vote for you on a working party line or the Democrat line or some other line, anywhere your name appears on the ballot. So if Biden is on the ballot, let's say, again, this is a thought exercise only, as an independent, what happens to those electoral votes should he, in fact, become the victor as an independent? Maybe that even helps him win Ohio because they see him now as an independent. What happens to those electoral votes? Does anybody know? I don't know the answer. We may not have the answer.
I don't know. I mean,
something to think about. Here's the other thought I had, because, I care very deeply about Madam Vice President. What impact does this have on Vice President Harris? Is there any backlash for her?
I don't think there's any backlash for her as mm-hmm. the current VP. Mm-hmm. I think it's a signal, largely and wholly from the Republican parties once again, about the impact that they will have on women's opportunities and where they rely. Are you telling me that you have this Ohio majority that gets to decide whether or not people have the opportunity to vote for Vice President Harris in conjunction with President Biden again? I don't see where that's democratic.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm looking not just at 2024, but at 2028. Yeah. And if we've got these kind of gains, it means that we need to start looking at ballot access at the state level and making sure that in the planning process, we take into consideration that we're not going to have a party that will extend any level of goodwill.
Yes, that's right.
And so if we get it, good, but I don't think we should plan on getting it. So we should plan around it. And so in 2028, the convention should clearly be before whatever their deadline is, because it hadn't always been 90 days. It was 75 days up until maybe the early 2000s, and then they changed it to 90 days. So, whatever the works are, we should be prepared for them.
Yes. I mean, this is a really tough call. And I do kind of bristle a little bit around the idea that the parties, either Republican or Democrats, should have to change or think about changing their convention timeline to benefit or to suit one state. And the reason that I say that is because, as you pointed out, most of the time these conventions have to be set because of how much work goes into putting them on, and the other things that have to happen, like electing the delegates and things like that. They need at least a year. Well, the reality is that the state legislature could change the law again at any time. And in fact, we've seen that in the past. Now, it equally impacted Republicans and Democrats. And so when it equally impacts them, then they clearly have no problems making accommodation. But when it only impacts one, in this case, only the Democrats, and the Republicans lead, clearly they're doing something else. So, I mean, I think it's a slippery slope. I think at the end of the day, the side that we really need to be on is not either Republicans or Democrats, but democracy. And I don't understand why. And I want to say one more thing in terms of something you brought up earlier, Chantel, and that is, are we holding these leaders accountable? I mean, if I'm an Ohio voter, Simone, I don't know about you, but I be looking at these senators a little bit cross-eyed. I be looking at them and saying, where is the voice standing up for the people and our right to pick our own leadership? Where is the independent voice that's breaking with the, as you called them, what'd you call them, petty Republicans? Patty Republicans, and standing up and saying, this ain't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about Ohioans having a chance to participate in their own democracy, because somebody from one of these parties is going to be president. And Ohioans, it seems to me, should have a right to vote for them. Am I wrong?
Absolutely not. They are passing off the responsibility and their commitment to the voters.
Yeah, I see that 100%. All right, well, let's just end here and say, not about Republican versus Democrat. It's not even really about whether or not Biden should be on the ballot in Ohio. At the end of the day, it's really about Ohioans and any American who has the right to vote, and they should be fighting for the right to choose their leadership. They should be fighting for democracy and equal opportunity. And let me just say that if Biden is not on the ballot, neither is Vice President Harris. And as a leader of an organization that promotes Black women, that is just unacceptable. So what is our call to action? Well, our call to action is really simple. We want you to let the senators in Ohio, particularly Matt Huffman, who's the president of the Senate, and state legislatures, know that we expect them to be leaders on democracy and not dictators over democracy. We expect them to give the right to the voters to make a choice on who will be their leader. Ask them to be a leader for charge. Ask him to lead the charge for democracy, fairness, and equal opportunity. Now, the equal opportunity part may be taking it too far, but let's at least get democracy in there. That's what I want your call to action to be. So, especially if you live in Ohio, but even if you don't live in Ohio, reach out to those senators and representatives in Ohio. Let them know that you think that this is a slight not only against Ohioans, but against Americans, and that you expect them to be leaders for democracy. Whew, boy, I don't know where we are, where we sit, but hopefully it gets better. Hopefully this is a non-issue, but I agree. We all still must stand up. I know we're tired, but the fight continues. Thank you for joining us here at the Clapback, Get the Facts. We will be back with more clapping back and more getting of the facts next time. Our next episode, we're going to be digging into whether Vice President Harris is a drag on the ticket or not. You do not want to miss that conversation. See you soon.
Thank you for joining us here on Clapback Get the Facts podcast. We hope that you're leaving feeling more informed and ready to provide others with the facts. We would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this episode. So post the show on your Instagram story and tag us at Sisters Lead. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, please leave a review so others can get some sense of the facts that we're providing. Finally, if you would like to learn more about local resources and other projects we're working on, go to sistersleadsistersvote.org.